Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Griffith Observatory. It's so lovely to have you here on this sunny Sunday evening. This is the seventh day of our festival here at Griffith Observatory, celebrating the landing of astronauts on the moon in the Apollo 11 mission. I'm going to let that music stop. There we go. Thank you. A little cell phone moment there. So I just want to welcome you again to Griffith Observatory. We have had quite a festival celebrating the launch, the landing, the moonwalk, and yesterday we had a busy day all day long, talks all day long, celebrating the historic moment of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepping on the moon. So tonight we're going to not look back but look forward. What is in store for us at the moon? What's in store for humankind? Do we want to go back? Are we going back? Who's going back? What will we do there? And in order to bring all of those ideas to us, we have just a spectacular speaker tonight. Veteran space journalist Leonard David is our speaker tonight. He's been a space journalist for 50 years and knows just about everything and everyone personally who's been involved in space exploration over that time. He is tonight talking about his new book, Moon Rush, which is on sale in our book store. And after tonight's program, there will be an opportunity to meet with Mr. David and to get your book signed. And so we hope you'll stay and purchase a book. His two previous books were not about the moon, but about Mars. The one just prior was Mars, Our Future on the Red Planet, which was the companion book to the National Geographic and Ron Howard program about returning to Mars, about going to Mars, if any of you saw that program, and Leonard wrote the companion book. And prior to that, he was co-author on Mission to Mars, My Vision for Space Exploration, which was co-authored with Buzz Aldrin. So you may be very familiar that Buzz Aldrin has a very strong vision about how we should go to Mars, and Leonard literally wrote the book with him about that. Leonard is a journalist who has written for countless magazines. If it's a magazine about space, he's written for it. He's a regular columnist for Space.com as the Space Insider column. He's written for Scientific American, for Sky and Telescope, for Air and Space Magazine, for Aerospace America, Aviation Week and Space Technology, on the list goes. Prior to that, he was the editor for Ad Astra magazine, the magazine of the National Space Society. And well, I've known Leonard almost a lot of those years, and he's pretty much published, as I say, in every space journal that you can imagine. He's a winner of 7 awards, and I didn't know that, even though I've known him all these years. And I'm not going to read them all, but they're from the American Astronautical Society, the National Space Club, the Royal Aeronautic Society, two from them, the National Space Society, the Space Journalist Award from the Space Tourism organization. So this is the man with the knowledge, and he's going to share it with you today. He's looking at me like, why are you saying that about me? But he is. So he's going to share that with you this evening. So let's welcome to the stage Leonard David.
Boy, you
push it back. Okay, thank you.
There we go.
Thank you. Most of my life have been muted, so, okay. Yeah, when you're a journalist, you sit at home and you're muted because you're at the computer. You sit in Colorado, where I live now, and you write articles about space. And it's pretty exciting. This is a very, I'm 70, how old? 72. My wife confirms this. I lived through the Apollo program. It was a great time, but I also grew up in San Diego where the Atlas rocket was being produced, and I lived in a area where all the Atlas rocketeers were busy blowing up the Atlas trying to get it ready for John Glenn. And you know, it was an amazing period of time when we were just on the cusp of space exploration, all generated by the Soviet Union, the space race. But anyway, the main message, you know, the takeaway message of this talk, the moon looms. How many people have seen the moon in the sky? Come on. It's pretty visible. It's over there. It's close. It's not that far away. I know some people know where Mars is, but it's pretty far away compared to the moon. And that's why we sent people there. We're at this tremendous moment, and it's sort of like a time capsule for space. We're all living through the 50th anniversary. How many people saw the Apollo 11 landing here? Okay, well, not, you know, it's just it's a handful. We're getting old, you know. But what an incredible achievement. But I will tell you right now, one of the messages is this. I wish I understood where we're going. I wish I understood, as a kid, I signed up. Werner von Braun had a timetable of where we should be by now. When I'm a kid, this is my space cadet moment. I signed up for writing about space exploration. We should be on Alpha Centauri by now. We're behind. We're so far behind. I love the moon. I love Mars, but we were going to go interstellar. And so I'm a little disappointed at 72. And this was the moment in my life, you know, the 184-pound Sputnik 1, the former Soviet Union launches this thing, and, you know, it beeps, it does things, people got excited. I actually saw this, the rocket that put it into Earth orbit, and in Texas, when I first saw this, and this was an artificial satellite. We had no idea what was in the satellite. This was the space race. This was what's in the satellite, a bomb. That's all, you know, the U.S.-centric view was they're launching a bomb. And so that glued my thing. And, you know, then we get going on, what's the American response? Well, it turned out to be Vanguard 1. And it blew up on the launch pad. And the classic newspaper line from cynics like reporters like me was, American Sputnik goes kaputnik. So we were in a race, and we had some issues here. But I wanted to get through these slides because I have over 3,000, and I'm trying to cut this down to 50. But anyway, Jules Verne, I mean, let's face it, we've been imbued with the moon for quite a while through science fiction. Jules Verne, a film in 1902, the Jules Verne book actually inspired one of the first science fiction films. And okay, from there, when you think about, and we're moving up in time to 2001, A Space Odyssey. And what were these astronauts looking at? Clavius Crater had a city on the moon. And why did they go to Clavius Crater? When you think about the plot line of that film written by Arthur Clarke and Stanley Kubrick as far as the movie production, look for the monolith. The monolith. And I'm telling you right now, get ready, because there are many, many monoliths on the moon. And I'm not going to say alien intelligence. I'm just saying monolith in the terms of mysteries about the moon that we don't know. We don't know the moon squat. We've been there, done that. It's not a been there, done that world. And there's a lot of other things that we're going to find out about the moon. Believe me. Okay, now, I'm a kid. We're in California. I grew up going on cislunar, circumlunar flights from Anaheim. And I had an e-ticket to the moon dozens and dozens of times. I rode this ride for a long time. Here's the inside of that TWA rocket to the moon at Disneyland. And we all sat around in the circle. And the best part of this mission was we went around the moon, and as we got to the far side of the moon, not the dark side, but the far side of the moon, but it was in dark at the time, because you know there's 14 days, 14 nights, lunar day, lunar night, even on the far side. But we went around the moon, and they fired flares down on the moon's surface. And it was one or two flares, and they showed the far side of the moon, and the captain was going, here's what we're seeing. And yeah, there's craters back there. Okay, well, that's not a big thing. The third flare, I think, as a kid, I remember, explodes, and it shows a city. And he says, we don't know what the structure is. And you're 12 or 13 years old, and you're going, yes, sir, let's go to the moon. There's something happening on the far side of the moon with a city on the moon. But I got my little certificate. You know, I'm a pioneer, went back on the far side of the moon many times. Now, this is the other thing as I grew up. Another thing that the honeymooners. I don't know how many people know the honeymooners. Okay, Jackie Gleason, come on. That was my other thing about the moon. Let's get to the moon. Okay, and then I found this in my research. It's Alice Cramden. But as you know, today, for the last week, Apollo 11 landing, and this person started it all. John F. Kennedy, within a decade, tried to get a person to the moon and return that person back to Earth. And that was a tremendous challenge today, even today to do. One thing that people don't realize too much is that Kennedy and the former, or the president of the Soviet Union at the time, Nikita Khrushchev, he actually tried to make a deal with him. Would you like to go with us? Let's both go. Let's all go. Khrushchev said, "Niet." Didn't happen. And he probably regretted that because in a few slides I'll tell you why. But the Soviets were doing their own space race, early pioneering lunar missions, the first far side picture of the moon. Look how, we were ecstatic. Yeah, there's the far side of the moon. And the Soviet Union was able to take pictures of this. They landed a Luna 9 probe. First surface pictures, robotic lander. And here we're getting close-up images of the moon, through the Soviet Union landers. Lunokhod, rovers on the moon, rolling around. Again, all robotic, run by people in Moscow or somewhere on the outskirts of Moscow, doing telerobotics, driving these rovers on the moon. The U.S., as NASA kicked in, because NASA was created primarily because of the Soviet Union space race opportunity, and we got 1958 is when NASA was created. But the early programs to go to the moon were Ranger, Surveyor, a lander, lunar orbiter. All these things gave us much more precise detail about the moon, and particularly it's what are we dealing with if we have to send people there? What kind of environment are we sending people to? And so here we are today, 50 years after all that, And I wanted to signal somebody that was really one of the key persons to make Apollo astronauts understand how to use a hammer on the moon. That was the cool thing. This is Gene Shoemaker in the middle. These are the amalgam of all the Apollo astronauts, and they trained to be geologists, be scientists. Most of these people were test pilots. These were people that were going to try to get us to the moon and safely, but they also, the benefit of being a test pilot and getting to the moon, you actually had to use the hammer on the moon and learn science about what to collect to bring back to Earth. Obviously, we had to build giant rockets. The Apollo Saturn V, huge undertaking, amazing vehicle even today. And we're trying to mimic this today with the space launch system that NASA is putting together. This is where Khrushchev went awry. This on the Soviet Union side, because he said, "Niet, we'll build our own boosters. We're going to go to the moon. We're going to be able to pull this off on our own." Well, there's the comparison of the U.S. and the Soviet boosters. And here's the result. It blew up several times. I mean, this thing did not work, and they lost any opportunity to beat the United States to the moon and put cosmonauts on the moon before the United States. So that was a blow to the Soviet Union. But we had our own problems. We had Apollo fire. Back in '67, January, we had this tremendous fire that's killed 3 of our early Apollo astronauts. And so that was the signal that maybe we're going too fast. Can we beat the deadline? Can we get Kennedy's vision done? And this happened in 1967. So early in January. And I always remember coming home from high school and hearing this story, and I think, well, it's all over. Space race, we're not going to make it to the moon in the Kennedy time frame. But things happen. NASA engineers really went to a town. Everybody jumped in and solved the problems, understood what the issue was with the Apollo 1 fire. We had Apollo 8, the circumlunar flight. This obviously mimicked my TWA rocket to the moon, and unbelievable. And this is the beginning of what some people claim was the environmental movement with Apollo 8, seeing the Earth from the moon. Apollo 11 with the first footprint. And here's the thing that I'm trying to get across with this slide. It's probably not the best one, but I'm trying to figure this out. Okay, they're walking around for a couple hours out there. I had the opportunity to write a book with Buzz, and Buzz always tells the story of being in the lunar module and looking down there at Neil after he went out, and he said, well, he didn't go through the dust. I guess it's safe, So, we learned. And this is the kind of the very small footprints on the moon that Neil Armstrong and Buzz put down, and it shows you the scale of their search on the moon. It's a pretty small area, but it was historic. It was 50 years ago. We got very good on pinpoint landings. Apollo 12, we could actually land near Surveyor, an early U.S. NASA lander, and they actually cut the camera off and brought it back to the Earth. But we were really trying to get down to precise landing zones, and also going to places that were probably more dangerous than other places, scientifically. So that was a crucial moment. Then we had how many people have seen Apollo 13? We all know the saga of this thing. NASA's greatest failure, I don't know, but it was a great success story of astronauts and the ground control working together to bring these people back, the 3 astronauts that couldn't make the landing on the moon, and successfully brought them back to Earth safe and sound. Again, the kind of precision landings, the kind of technology that we're starting to use for understanding the moon. And of course, we had a rover, and we also had a guy get a speeding ticket on the moon for the first time. Apollo 17, last 1972 was the Apollo 17, the last mission on the moon. And we brought back rocks, and we brought back 800 and some pounds of rocks, I think is the number. And we're still understanding what those rocks are telling us. In fact, a story that's not very well known is that they actually just a few weeks ago starting to open up a bunch of Apollo rocks that had not been opened before. And because the instruments that we have today compared to the 1960s are much more different and much more precision in their ability to understand the chemistry of the Apollo rocks. So they're just opening up some new rocks that have never seen the scrutiny of science before the last few weeks. So that's happened. That's pretty cool. Here's sort of an overview, of where these Apollo vehicles landed. 12 people walked on the moon between 1969 and 1972. But that was the end of the trail, 1972, December. Harrison Schmitt and Eugene Cernan, last people on the moon. And here's sort of an overview of what's happened with Apollo and even a few little things that have happened after Apollo, and shows you the kind of surveillance we have been doing with robotic landers and human landers over those time frames. So we had a crash landing on the moon. Israel added a new crater to the moon. Didn't work right. But the point was, this was a private sector operation, and Israel got very, very close to actually succeeding. And we'll see a lot of these commercial landers. I'll talk about that in a little bit. One thing to keep in mind, and one of the signals of my book, keep an eye on China. China is long-term in for it, for the go. And they also have a president that's there forever, I guess. And I think they have the political will and they have the money to operate a fairly significant lunar program. And this is a Chang'e 4 on the far side of the moon. The first time any lander has ever gone to the far side of the moon. It unleashed the U-22 little robot rover, and they probably now, I think I just wrote something, I have to remember what I write. Gets difficult sometimes, but I think it's the 7th lunar cycle. These things are still working, and they're doing very well, doing some scientific experiments, and I think we're going to hear some new news from U-2 rover about what it's found, some surprising news. If everything is on track with China, they're going to actually land on the moon and bring samples back for the first time since 1976. The Soviets did that. And so this may happen in December of this year. And again, this is all robotic spacecraft. But the thing to keep in mind, they have a human space program, and it's pretty aggressive, and they're, for the first time in the next few years, you're going to start seeing more Chinese astronauts putting together their own space station. Okay, and tomorrow, look for India. They're going to shoot for the moon with a huge booster that's going to attempt a South Pole landing. This is happening tomorrow about, 5 or 6 here, I think, our time. They had a technical glitch a week or so ago, and they had a delay, but they're going to go tomorrow and attempt to land this lander on the moon, which has a little rover. It's always cute to have a little rover. You got to have a rover. And watch for Russia. They're coming back into the vogue. I keep wondering, exactly where Russia is going to come back into the moon mainstream. And they're about ready where they have a lunar program that they're going to reinstall. And they're working with the European Space Agency to create this capability. So we'll see how this goes. But that's another, Russia back to the moon. But the big story, the big difference this go around, after 50 years of Apollo program, we've got private sector people fascinated about their own space program. Now, I know how many people survived the Prime, how many people did the Prime thing with Bezos and Amazon.com and all that. You are supporting a space program through your money. Jeff Bezos is he's the richest, I guess, is the richest guy on the planet. And I haven't said anything back lately from him, so I guess it's going fine. But he's investing in space exploration. He's got a suborbital space concept that's going to probably, but maybe by the end of the year or early next, launch suborbital tourists into space. He's a big believer. He's a businessman. He's got a scheme for the moon. And I kind of put my money, even though I have nothing like what he has, on him succeeding. Here's his suborbital rockets. He's got a big vision for the future about bigger vehicles that will put things in orbit and to the moon. And he just about a month or so ago, this is his lunar lander, Blue Moon project. That's Jeff Bezos. So that's a great story evolving with private sector money and your money. Here's an upscale vehicle that Jeff Bezos wants to build for human landers. Okay, here's a guy that doesn't get much publicity because he doesn't want you to talk about him. Robert Bigelow is a hotel mogul. He's a construction guy. One of the earliest interviews I did with millionaire, billionaire people was with Bob Bigelow. And he's a work. He's a very interesting guy. He spent about 250, maybe 300 million by now on his own money on private sector space exploration. He's got inflatable modules. You want an inflatable module on the moon? We'll give you one. He's very interesting, a very charismatic guy, and he's put his money where his mouth is and actually flown one of these expandable modules. Right now, it's on the space station, the International Space Station. This is his scheme for a lunar kind of base that he would build using his habitable inflatable modules. Then we have Elon Musk. I know many of you drove here in the Tesla. But Elon's got visions about starships and going back to the moon. He always wonders what happened to the moon base. I thought we would have one by now. Same with me. And so Elon, as much as a passionate guy about Mars exploration, he also has the moon in his view. Okay, I'm trying to wrap this up, and now this is the crippler, okay? This is me talking after 30 years of being in Washington, D.C., several decades, and I've been, hammered by the politics, by the vision, by the thing changing, and the Congress going this way, and there's no money, there's some money, it's, half-baked or it's full-baked. Okay, this is kind of the main message here, political will and leadership. How strong is our commitment to space? And I think we all, you're here because you, I assume, care about the space program or are wondering where we're going or where we're headed. This is the key thing. What is the political will and leadership? I walked out of 30 years as Capitol Hill or lack of capital. These things cost money. It's great to be, 50th anniversary and saluting things, and we're all excited about how we did it. Can we do it again? And how do we do it? Nixon, was a benefactor of a decision by Kennedy to go to the moon. And here's, Neil and Mike Collins and Buzz Aldrin stuffed in the lab there because they were worried about moon germs at the time. Okay, then we had George, Bush Jr. there with a pretty interesting vision of space. And unfortunately, and he had a program pretty much like the Trump vision. Go to the moon first. We'll do Mars eventually. We'll get there. But there was no money. There was no money. And so that program died. And this guy killed it. He helped kill it for sure. Obama said, why are we going back to the moon? We should go to we sent Neil and Buzz for, let's go to an asteroid. Let's go to Mars direct or whatever. So, he had his own vision, and that's sort of the message. We have these presidential cycles that go through here, and then we have Trump now. He signed Space Directive 1. I know many of you have it by your bedstead. Space Directive 1 told NASA, you're going back to the moon. Seemed pretty pointed. Okay, well, sometimes Trump says, why are we going back to the moon? So you're not sure what's going on in the last few days. Buzz is going, let's go direct to Mars. And Mike Collins, let's go to Mars. So anyway, it's kind of a bizarre time. And this is why I left Washington, D.C. This is exactly it. We're, 30 years of that, of this herky-jerky thing. And here's the guy on the right, by the way, is Jack Schmitt, Apollo 17 astronaut, the first geologist on the moon and last. And the program ended, but Jack is, kind of looking on with the Space Directive 1, and then we got, the beginnings of what NASA is trying to pull together to honor the Space Directive 1. Okay, we have a thing called the Lunar Gateway, and people are critical. Some people are supportive. It's a mini space station. You put it in cislunar space, and you can run robots on the moon from the thing. You can actually, perhaps in the future, put humans, have descent vehicles from the, from this facility and go back to the moon. I'm in the camp that I like this because this may be all NASA's going to get. The budgets, to me, are going to be so extreme on doing the bigger picture. Early on, the gateway may be as good as we're going to get. So you better hope, in some ways, in my mind, that this kind of does some kind of good. I think it can. But I don't look at it from a technology viewpoint. I look at it from a NASA viewpoint. I look at it as this is an agency that's old. This is an agency, NASA, that has not been past low Earth orbit since 1972. You're going to have to train people on the ground. You're going to have to get people to understand safety, risk, environments, radiation. This may be the right step. And it reminds me a little bit of the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo. You had to learn on the run. And so let's see if this evolves or de-evolves in the next few years. My view is I'm voting for it. I've got a lot of friends of mine that hate me. But, can you run robots on the moon from this facility? Telerobotics like the Lunica, the Russian vehicle. And we have a new mandate that in 5 years, we're going to put, this is from Vice President Pence, charge to NASA that within 5 years, we're going to put a man and a woman on the moon on the South Pole of the moon. And here's the candidate women now in the astronaut corps. And you talk to any of these people and they're ready to go. Lockheed Martin, a lot of aerospace companies are trying to put together lunar landing programs to help NASA within a 5-year time period to pull this off by 2024. Okay, then one of the sites is Shackleton Crater. And why Shackleton Crater? This is a really interesting area because it's sun shy. The sun has not come down into that crater for billions of years. And the point is that there may be tons, whatever that means, of water ice. And when you have water ice, and can you extract the water ice and actually make fuel, oxygen, drinkable water, and rocket fuel? So the problem here, and you go talk to geologists and you talk to miners, which I do because I'm in Colorado and I go to the School of Mines. Well, it sounds interesting. You're going to have to do some boreholes. You got to drag up some stuff. What's the composition going to be like? Is it economically viable to even grind this stuff up? How much hardware do you have to put on the moon to do it? So, they're asking the basic questions, and those are the questions that we need. And here's some artistic version of illuminating a darkened crater on the moon in the polar region. Now, the best thing about this picture, I want you to remember this, the people making the most money on the future of the space program are the artists. Okay? These are cheap to do, and they're getting really good. CAD/CAM, you almost can't even tell if did that happen? Did we do the moon thing? Okay. Now, here's the bad news. This is one of my cynical side. Get ready. The lawyers are hovering around all this. We have space lawyers. Who has the right to go mine the moon? Who owns the moon? Property rights. If you're a private person, can't you just go there and do what you want to do and make money and, your stockholders are excited about what you've done? This is the big issue to keep an eye on. I know it's not a front thing, but it's space law. This is going to be one. Is it communism running the moon? Is it socialism? Is it going to be capitalism? What kind of ism is it going to be? And maybe we'll come up with another ism. Okay, European Space Agency have been very busy in the last few years creating what they call the Moon Village. They actually have put together pretty sophisticated plans to put a village on the moon that would also harbor human activities as well as a lot of robotic activities. And they're looking for a mayor of the Moon Village. I know many of you want to sign up for that. Here's some designs of what a lunar habitat on the moon would look like. And what do you use is the moon soil and all that to make structure. You can actually do 3D printing on the moon using the best of the moon's surface and the chemistry there to make structures on the moon. Okay, I want to emphasize one last time, and I'm out of here. The moon is not a been there, done that world. We're not even sure how it got there. There are various scientific views on how it formed. We certainly, from a scientific view, it would be nice to know how the moon was formed and what its relationship is with the Earth. Maybe there's a lot of clues there. Our future, I think, is now. We're in now history. And, we've got all these serpents floating around. You got the radiation. You got the, microgravity to me is scurvy. And we have the end of the world people. And I think we're going to beat those things back. We'll be able to explore space much differently than we've ever done before. And the best thing about it is that we're all going to be participants. I just saw something the other day with, a GoPro and a turtle, which I think, okay. So, no matter where we're going for exploration, we're going to have abilities for all of us to participate. And here's the space station. It's turned out to be a great test bed for a lot of things. We've had people up in space for a year. learning about microgravity impacts. You also need to cut hair in the space station. That's an important thing. You play music. Okay, there's a saxophone guy. And as you would expect, there are clowns in the astronaut corps. Okay, other message of the book is really technology changes. We are sort of, as much as we're heralding the Apollo program, I do think it's a Wright brothers moment. This is, space exploration, space flight is going to change. Technology changes. I found this, I don't know if this person was the first hearing aid test or listening for extraterrestrials. I don't know what it is, but technology changes, and how many people went through this with their parents. The Flashmatic, we had, we can beam messages to our TV, but here we are, AI, robotics. What is the future of technology and how it's going to change how we explore in space? And there is a gangbuster stuff coming. Virtual reality. That's an important note here. People are creative. We have no idea what people come up with. Now, here's the bad news. Okay. No matter what environment we go through on Earth, we find ways to beat the environment. Same way with space. Polar exploration, underwater exploration, top of the mountain exploration, deserts. We're good at this. We know how to tame environments to suit human capabilities. My guess is the first lunar bases will maybe be something Spartan like this on the Antarctica side. These are kind of bases that are built up. But who knows if this can lead to this kind of thing. So we got a ways to go. It's a big jump. And here's a bad jump on the moon. We have to learn how to walk better on the moon. If we're going to be there, believe me, there are people looking at how best to walk on the moon. And that means new spacesuits, new designs. And here's somebody that was caught in Pasadena last night with the moon suit. So we're going to see a different kind of spacesuits that allow mobility, allow more flexibility, because people are going to be living and working for long term on the moon and building and living in these different kind of structures. One other message, Disneyland of dust. What was your line? Laura had a great line. I said Disneyland of dust is one thing that we got to worry about, the dust. And your line was what?
The eighth dwarf is dusty.
The eighth dwarf is dusty. Okay, I love that one. We're going to add that later. But there's Neil kicking up the dust on the moon. That's a bad problem. It gets into the suits, it gets into the hardware, it really gums up the works. And here's in one of the last missions with all the dust on top of his suit, and they brought that into the lunar module, and they actually had some medical issues dealing with the dust on the lunar within the lunar module. So we got to figure out that moon. And in one way, this is a new experiment that's going to be run in a couple of years of microwaving the lunar dust to actually put a sheen on it and actually try to subdue the dust that would come out. But these are the kind of experiments we're going to have to do if we're really going to be there for long term on the moon. Okay, one of the other things that's going on, how many preservationists do we have here? People are looking at preserving the Apollo 11 site because these are historic areas, and people are starting to actually make some new legislation about making sure we don't land near these things and throw dust on them or destroy them somehow. You don't want to run over Neil Armstrong's footprints with a robot. So there's a lot, and this is one of the clever things that this, for all humankind, has put. out. And they've got some traction on this. So we'll see, how do we preserve the sites on the moon for us space tourists that may get there in the future. Okay, lava tube exploration, that's another possibility for underground habitats. Skylights on the moon, we see things that we don't understand. People have great visions about huge colonies and coliseums on the moon, moon temple. You want a moon temple. You know, somebody's already designed the moon temple. You know, if you get to the moon and you have to be contemplative, you got to go to the moon temple. And you could be asking, how much does this cost? Okay. Japan has created a lunar solar panel concept that they would ring the moon with solar cells made from the lunar soil that you could actually beam back energy from the moon. So, okay, we're getting close to the end, I'm sorry. Okay, my take is back to the moon, this time to stray or stay. What are we talking about here? You know, how committed is this country to lunar exploration and return to the moon and survive and thrive and set up a settlement on the moon or some kind of base? We'll see. If the U.S. doesn't do it, I believe China will, and other countries are going to be coming behind that. So make the moon great again. This is a scary picture for some people. So as much as I think I know what I'm talking about, there is the problem. Okay, last thing. People ask me, how would you become a space journalist? Why do you care? Because I had my own space habitat when I was in high school. And this is my high school science experiment called Project Epic. My mom called it a death trap. But EPIC stood for Experimental Prolonged Isolation Chamber. And that's the best thing about high school. You can name your project. Now here I am with Project EPIC. This is the best plywood that you could ever ask to be bought at the local store. I reversed my mom's vacuum cleaner to create the environmental control system. Don't laugh, this was serious stuff. You know how long this took to build? I had Jerry, who was the top-notch electrical guy in an electric shop, create the circuitry for this thing. Much of this we sent to NASA, by the way. We sent all the diagrams, everything. There's Jerry. I've never seen him again. He's flipping a switch on the thing. I stayed in this thing for 12 hours. And the whole point was, you light-depriving person, if your space capsule went out of light, I don't know why, but you know, okay, you're in there and how long can you survive in a darkened room? Okay, Jerry went for 24 hours. That's why I never heard from him again. We had to build an airlock in the back of the Project Epic to hand in food. You couldn't let light in. It was very complicated design. Again, we sent these to NASA. Here I am with more hair, taking notes about living in a box for 12 hours with a thermometer and life support systems. Another close-up proving that a box at night gets cold, basically as the temperature drops. There's some of the intricate Jerry work on the instrumentation panel. So that's pretty much it. I just want to give you some sense of how I got here and what happened to me. The bad news in this, and you got to remember this, I wrote to Holloman Air Force Base as a kid and said, I'm doing this experiment in high school. And Holloman and Alamogordo were the ones that were launching the first monkeys into space. They were training the monkeys. They were flying things. And I wrote to the head of the thing on the typewriter my mom had, sent him a letter and said, we're doing this experiment, 12 hours and then we're going to have 24 hours. I didn't hear anything. I didn't get a letter back. Yeah, this is no internet. You had to put a stamp on this thing and send it out. So I do this. About 2 weeks later, I get a note back from the head guy at Holloman Alamogordo saying, "Don't do it. Don't do it. You could become a journalist." And there I am. So thanks a lot for listening. And now, here we are. We're going to increase our panel here just to talk for a second. My good friend Lon Raines is going to join me, and Laura Danley, who you know very well. But Lon is the current director of special projects at Northrop Grumman. He's been focused this year on the Apollo 50th anniversary, 10 years as communications director for Northrop Grumman Space Systems, and before that, founding member of the Space News staff, 3 years as deputy editor and 15 years as editor. And he's retiring from Northrop Grumman next month. And he's a good friend of mine, and he edited a lot of my copy over the decades. He says butchered, but I say edited. But he's a good friend of mine, and so with that, Lon Raines and Laura joining me up here, and we'll answer any questions. And Lon's got some comments about this as well, where we're headed.
Well,
All right.
do you want to go first? I have so many
No, you go,
questions,
you
but
go.
you have comments already
Well,
in
I
mind.
actually have answers now.
yeah.
That last segment explains so much that I've wondered over the years. So, Leonard mentioned that I've been working on Apollo. I had 9 events that we did. I think this is the 9th that I've been involved in, and it has been. We were talking earlier. It's been phenomenal to see so many people so excited about Apollo. It's exceeded what I anticipated. When you look at how many people came out on the National Mall last night and saw the Saturn V on the Washington Monument. We actually were talking about the James Webb Space Telescope that we're building for NASA in Redondo Beach yesterday at the California Science Center. And it was July 20th, and so they'd been, advertising that they were going to have space things. They had 14,000 people, the most that have ever been through there in a single day, that came yesterday. So I'll be quick, but my history, I don't go quite as far back as Leonard. And I just, as a disclaimer, Leonard has forgotten more about space today than I'll ever know. But as a 7-8-year-old, we lived in Huntsville, Alabama. My dad worked for Southern Railways. He was the only Southern Railways person in Huntsville, and his only job was to make sure that all of the rocket components and other things that NASA needed got into Huntsville on time. And so it was a great time to be there. As you can imagine, the whole town was nothing but, space was it. It was everything. And we had a brand new elementary school, and we had televisions in every classroom. We watched all of the missions, and I got hooked then. And then, later on, after about 5 years as a political reporter, the company I worked for started Space News. And I thought, I'd like to go do that. I'll do that for a few years. And I ended up doing it for almost 20, and then came out here to California with my wife and got my whole family to come out here. But we've talked about the issues that Leonard, raised and did a good job, he and I, for 3 decades now. And the biggest ones are money, and political will. And how do we find both of those things? Leonard pointed out all of the activity that's going on right now that's really exciting. And I think, our company is working on the Lunar Gateway. We're very proud and excited to be doing that. We are working on the Space Launch System and the Orion capsule with Lockheed. And, it's good to see that we've got, a president who wants to, get us back on track and get us out of low Earth orbit. But as Leonard pointed out, we've seen this before. You left out the first President Bush, who stood on the steps of the Air and Space Museum and said we were going to go we were going to go to the moon.
That was the commission I was on.
Yeah. So we've been through this, and so you do get a little jaded. But I see a lot of momentum, and I couldn't agree more that watch the Chinese, because they're going about it in a methodical way. They're doing it slowly, and I think that Arthur C. Clarke, who was always ahead of all of us, if you read his book 2061, which was the one that came after the sequel, which was 2010, it was about the Chinese going to Europa. And I think that the Chinese have a good plan, but others, there are people in private industry, as Leonard showed, who are very interested in doing this. But it's hard. These things are hard. Governments are required, I think, to do a lot of what we need to do. But the private sector is going to bring also, I think, a new sense of let's do this a different way. Let's find more efficient and less expensive ways to do that. So with that, I'll let you make your observations and ask some questions.
The first question I wanted to ask, and you brought it up a couple of times, is this: should we go back to the moon or go to Mars? And we've heard last couple of days Buzz Aldrin speaking about this. We've heard our own president, even quite contrary to the first the space directive of 2 years ago, saying why are we going to the moon when in fact that. So I want to ask you about that. Is it essential to go back to the moon as a stepping stone to Mars, or can you just go to Mars and get on with it?
I think, getting on with it may be killing people on Mars. I subscribe to that we got to get back to the moon. I think that we have to get our space legs underneath us and learn how to do deep space exploration again. We haven't done this since 1972. Getting to Mars, one of the fallacies of any of these things is that, it doesn't really answer why we do it. Even if you had a moon base and you had the Mars thing, what is it about? Where do we go from there? Is that a foundation for something or just a bunch of rhetoric? And all these things are going to cost money to sustain. So it behooves the country that does this kind of stuff to implant within its own people and society, this is what we do. This is part of infrastructure in space, like we have down here on Earth. But it costs money to maintain and sustain these things. And I love these people. It's built into our genes. Okay, is it Levi's or Dockers or what are we talking about? It's built into our genes. Okay, well, obviously it isn't, because not everybody subscribes to going to space and settling other worlds. Maybe it's a unique trait with some unique people. I don't know.
Like Leonard, I'm in the go back to the moon first camp. I think that we probably could do a crash effort to go to Mars, but I think we need to be methodical. I think there's a lot we need to learn. Even to sustain ourselves on the moon, we have a lot to learn there. And that's where we do the proving ground, because as Leonard pointed out, the moon's 3 days away. If you get into trouble, it's 3 days away. Mars is 6 months. And the National Geographic series, the Ron Howard series, went into some of the issues that we might run into on Mars. And, my feeling is we will get there, but we'll get there when we get there.
When you say that, what do you mean? 10 years, 100 years? What kind of time scale?
We'll see. So he mentioned Bob Bigelow, and Bob's been a real visionary, and I think he's got, doesn't he have a thing up at one of his habitats is at the space station right now.
Yeah.
I can foresee there being a market, although in the beginning, for very wealthy individuals, we're going to see people doing suborbital flights. I don't think it'll be much longer before you see, probably within 10 years, some orbital flights, and maybe he gets his dream, which is a hotel in space, or he'll tell you now that he wants to just build space stations for countries that can't afford to do their own, and they come and spend a few weeks there. But I can see that within the realm of possibility for the private sector, for people to do honeymoons in low Earth orbit, and eventually as as Leonard writes in his book, we may turn the Sea of Tranquility into a tourist attraction, and protect it, put a dome over it, and have people go see it. I think it will take a while, but if the model is capitalism, like you talked about, there has to be a business case. You have to be able to. Bigelow has to be able to afford to launch and operate those things, and we'll see. It's going to be fits and starts. There will be failures. What I would love to think might happen from what we've seen this week and all this renewed interest in space is a bit more tolerance for risk. That's the place where we really lost, what we had in Apollo, which was, we'll risk it.
Yeah.
But it was managed risk. They knew what they were doing, and they took, very careful managed steps. But I talked to so many people, a lot of astronauts this past week, and the astronauts will tell you that the riskiest mission they did was Apollo 8, not Apollo 11. That they made a last-minute decision because the lunar lander was late, that they were going to just send a crew around the moon, and they did it with very little notice. And it was quite an extraordinary thing to do. With the lunar lander, which we're very proud at Northrop Grumman that we built, most of our constituent companies built just about every part of that lander, and including the descent engine, which is what actually got the Apollo 13 crew home safe. And
yeah, we had a program on Wednesday night with a couple of the engineers who designed that lunar descent engine. It was a fantastic program.
Yeah, Don Harvey and Jerry O'Verum,
Jerry
who are
O'Verum,
amazing guys.
It's on our YouTube channel if you want to go see it, because it was just a spectacular program. But it was quite the engineering feat, and it was wonderful to hear from them about that. So I've heard you mention the need for national investment and also the need for a business plan. Do either of you see either a country, and I know you mentioned China, or a business plan that will get us back permanently? Or do you think that with this, you had said it'll happen, but sort of fits and starts.
Right.
But I think I'm trying to grasp for something a little more solid. Is it hopeless? Should I not
Well, that's why I
look
think
for something?
my money is on the Chinese because they're methodical. And I think as far as anything that is sustained, they seem to have the political will. They have the money, mostly our money, but it's in their banks. And I think that they know where they want to be 25, 50, 75 years from now. We're a bit more chaotic in the way that we do things, but I would like to think that we're going to have a growing consensus that both people in private industry and people in government have said it will take both to get us back. Yeah. But it starts with the public needs to embrace this. You have to have the political will, and we'll find the money. Technology is not the issue. We have the technology. We could do a lot of things now, but we have a lot of needs. So,
do we have any questions from the audience? We have just a few minutes. Are there any questions? Yes.
Sure. In the last half century, since we've been on the moon, technology has improved so dramatically, and with the current technology, especially with the computer revolution that's happened in the last 20, 25 years, how easier do you think it is to go to the moon than it was 50 years ago?
I'm going to repeat the question for the live stream audience. With the improvements in technology in the last half century, and especially with computers being just, we were talking about the descent guidance computer had 2K of RAM and 8K of memory. K, not megs. So with all this change, how much easier is it to get to the moon today?
I think it's easier. I think it's, technology is there. It's the financial envelope, and it's going to be doable. But I think there's a lot of things about the moon that NASA itself calls strategic knowledge gaps. And one is plume effects, you know, landing on the moon and just hurting instruments. And this is coming up. There's going to be more and more talk about plume effects of all these landers coming down and what effect that has on the moon with hardware, but also the environment of the moon, which has a weak atmosphere. But, you know, are we going to see pollution of this kind of thin atmospheric activity on the moon? So I think we're there. I think, and we'll see a lot of these commercial landers. There's some great, also pinpoint landing. And you're going to see pinpoint landing if at Mars 2020 with sort of the Super Curiosity Mars rover that's coming up. For the first time, they're going to use sort of cruise missile technology, basically, to guide that thing in to be much more precise. So the landing zone is very well known, terrain mapping, all these things are going to happen. So yeah, I'm with you. The technology has changed to really change the environment of the moon in the sense of our ability to land anywhere we want to, very precisely.
So in your presentation, you briefly touched on what I think is going to really revolutionize things, which is artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
That, you know, there's been a long-running debate in the space community about, do we send robots or do we send people? The consensus is you need to send both. But one of the things that is going to happen with artificial intelligence is you get a good combination of the two. We are going to be able to enjoy the exploration of Mars and the moon from Earth in ways that we never thought before. If you looked at the film from the Apollo 11 landing, you can kind of just barely make out the lander. You're going to get it in 6K the next time, and it's going to be absolutely mesmerizing. You're going to have, you know, one of the things I always said, you know, we named a rover Curiosity, but they don't really have curiosity. People do. And it's often been said that for all the robots we've put on Mars, astronaut crew could do all that in a day that's been done in the last 30 years. Because the astronaut would go, oh, what's that over there? That's interesting. Let's go look at that. And so I think you'll have the ability with advanced robotics and AI to combine those two things. And maybe you have a robot like we do sometimes here on Earth and say, well, let's send the rover over there to look for this or before we go, and maybe to explore lava tubes and that kind of thing. So it's going to be easier. It's still not going to be cheaper, I don't think.
Yeah. One thing about Curiosity rover, I think I looked at some raw imagery this morning from Curiosity, and the thing landed in August of 2012, okay? It has driven 13 miles since that time. And you and I could clip that off ourselves.
I know.
You know, it's taken a long time for that thing, and not to make it, you know, negative thing, but I mean, it's stopped and done drilling and done all this stuff, but still, the amount of time it takes for robotic and the people, and they're trying to make the 2020 rover a little faster. So they learn, and also make sure the wheels are better off than they have been. So yeah, we're going to learn, and LiDAR and range system tracking and all. Also, GPS is coming to the moon. GPS is one of the big new things that's going to happen, and do a lot more pinpoint landings on all kinds of areas of the moon that we never got to. So the infrastructure of the moon will include its own GPS system. So that's going to be another great attribute.
Okay, question in the back there. And then, so in the back, and then you, sir. Yeah.
Yes. Hi, thank you guys so much for coming. It's been amazing. Jerry Elverum, just a couple of nights ago, said in kind of his closing remarks that it was really the why to go that was the biggest thing, and saying that things are getting off track with orbiting around asteroids and doing these things and sending satellites to different places. But he said the one thing that was really different for him was that declaration of going that Kennedy made from the World War II generation, and just when your nation calls, that's what you do. And I'm wondering, with the political will and capital you're mentioning, what's the why though? Why you do it? I think would be, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, totally understand political will and capital are necessary, But all these things, doing the things on the moon, the different things, I think even Jerry might have mentioned, we're doing a lot of things in space. We're sending probes everywhere. We're doing things, but what's the giant why that would get people to do it?
So let me repeat the question for the live stream. This gentleman remembers our talk the other day that Jerry Elverum was talking about the why, the critical reason why did we do it. And he pointed to Kennedy and said, when your nation calls, you respond. And it was in the post-war era, and there was a clear directive and clear sensibility within the country. So now, especially given the political environment and the financial environment, what is the big why?
So I want to make 2 points. One is that what we were doing in the 1960s was even more controversial then than it is today. People forget that because of all the great success, but there were a lot of people who were opposed to the money that we were spending on the moon. But the why for me is science. The things that we will learn about ourselves, about our own planet, about the creation of the universe, and I look at it as all one thing. It's not just going back to the moon. It's what the James Webb Space Telescope will do, building on what Hubble and Chandra have done. It's learning who are we, how did we get here. That for me is the why. It's science, it's exploration, and do it as we can afford it. But I think it's critically important. One of the things that bothers me more than anything, and I'd be interested, Dr. Danley, in your opinion on this, is I've seen over the last 30 years, we've not valued science the way we did in the 1960s. And I would certainly like to see a resurgence of people understanding the really great value of science.
Oh, I was going to let you answer this gentleman's question first.
He posed it to you, so you
Well,
fill in the blank there.
I have a sort of a cynical view, I'm afraid. And I am a scientist, and obviously wanting to know more about the universe in which I live is a huge piece of my emotional and psychological and intellectual makeup. But I think you're correct. That has become diminished, and even in the face of the important things that science can do with the problems we face here on Earth, with global climate change, with medicine, disease, just all of the things that science is absolutely critical for, and it's less and less understood and less appreciated. So I have a grave concern about that, as most scientists do, that science is very much misunderstood. Hey, those scientists changed their minds, that means it's a weakness. No, that means it's a strength. It means we've learned more, and we've adjusted, and we're getting smarter. So I could wax on for this for quite a while, but I won't. I think it's a sign of the psychological times in which we live. And here's my cynical part. I don't really see a solution. I think it might get worse before it gets better. I think it's absolutely essential that those who participate in the dialogue, and everybody participates in the dialogue now because of the prevalence of social media, do so responsibly and speak up and participate. But because there are so many voices, because you can falsify just about anything, it's very hard to know what's real and what's not real, and I think that's a real threat to us, perhaps our greatest threat. So that's not a very cheerful answer. It's why I do what I do, trying to be here every day and help people who come to Griffith Observatory see a little bit more about how we know about the universe in which we live. But it's a tall order to get that.
Just to build on that, one thing that I've actually sat in advisory meetings that NASA invited and then kicked out of there, but I always say, tell us what you don't know. They're so busy trying to tell you everything we learned, and that's a good thing. But I tell you, the more, as reporters, tell me what you don't understand. That's the story. What is it that's so mysterious that you just can't pull it together to give the answer? That's fun. And that just livens up science.
I do want to get to this gentleman's question because I promised him we would answer it, and we're
Okay.
running out of time, so please go ahead.
Sure. I'm curious to know whether or not you see, at least in the long term, whether or not there's any kind of a business case for going to the moon and harvesting rare earth or so-called rare earth elements, geology, et cetera. Because I suspect that the Chinese are not doing it just for pure science and altruistic means. I think they've got a long-term plan, their 100-year plan, et cetera, that centers something on the commerce and economics of minerals and elements that are very, very rare, but yet so necessary in modern-day technology.
So this gentleman wants to know whether or not there is a solid business case for resources from the moon, for mining rare earth elements, other resources that might be marketable and give a business case for a return to the moon.
I think there is, but it depends on getting the cost down. So that you can make a business case if you can get the cost down. Any of the things that you just talked about are very capital intensive. Requires a lot of money to build the infrastructure to go do those things. If we, people have talked about mining helium-3, which would be great if we had fusion. So if we get fusion and helium-3 is plentiful on the moon and it's rare on Earth, then you might have a business case there. The business case will take care of itself, and we will be surprised. That's the other thing. We'll continually be surprised. Who would have thought when Leonard and I started in this business, when you and I first met in the late '80s, that people would become billionaires by making little pages on computers that people would go visit? Who would have predicted that? Well, obviously some people did, but I wasn't one of them.
Yeah, really. You made no money on that.
And yet that became the dominant industry in this country.
Yeah.
So
in the book, I'm not a great historian by any stretch of the imagination, but I went back and looked at Seward's Folly, the
Correct.
purchase of Alaska and buying it from Russia in this wilderness. And in Congress, they scoffed. This guy's crazy. And it passed me, I think, by whatever I wrote in there about one boat, and we bought Alaska. And then as exploration went in there, and gold rush and everything else, turns out to be an economic wellspring. Yeah. And I kind of liken that a little bit to the moon. I really think we got some surprises coming. It's corny, but skimmed the surface. I mean, Apollo, got some rocks and, some dust and things and brought it back. And my guess is there's some other stuff happening on the moon. They're going to be very surprising.
it's going to be an incremental process.
Yeah.
So, again, we talked about the fact that I think we will have, over the course of the next 10, 20 years, pretty good space tourism. And that'll require infrastructure, and other people will see opportunities. Wow, I could do this for them, and I could build satellites that go and refuel them. And then once all that starts to build, and somebody says, well, I've got a better idea of how we get people back and forth to the moon, it'll all start to take hold, and the business cases will start to present themselves.
Well, we are past time, but I do see one more hand, so we'll take that, and then that's it.
I grew up in Sacramento, and we had in the 1800s our first Apollo program, and that was the Transcontinental Railroad. And the big four in Sacramento and San Francisco got together and said, we're going to do this along with the US government. I'm thinking Gateway, and I'm thinking, why can't we do the same thing? I mean, is there a train baron today who has a compliant ego who would be willing to work with the government to create Gateway, so jumpstart this?
So this gentleman compares the Transcontinental Railroad and the partnership between wealthy individuals and government, and is that what we're looking at today?
I don't know. It sounds like a good sci-fi novel. I think get on writing that thing. It sounds like a good one. I got good plot there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one thing, you made me think of something. One thing that's happening in Colorado Springs, the last space symposium meeting, They have a huge meeting there, and a lot of generals show up, and people are saluting each other, and a lot of things going on in there. For the first time, I saw in the corner of their charts, cislunar space as a new military posture. And they are looking at cislunar space from a military capability. That means, if you have water ice that you've made from the moon, refueling assets, military assets, also intelligence data collection at cislunar space. This is the progression of the military, the high ground. And cislunar space is going to be the new high ground. And I saw it for the first time in charts at the Colorado Springs meeting. I don't know what it means. As a peacenik, I go, oh my God, here we go. We'll see where that goes, but it drives a lot of the economics of space that we're probably not aware of now, what the military might want. And military contractors are going to eat that up, and they're going to help support that ability of the military to operate in that cislunar space. So we'll see what that means. That fits into keep writing that novel, though. That's an important thing.
So any last comment, Lon, before we close this evening?
Well, I did want to say that I'm more an optimist than you are, and I do think that from what I've seen this last week, and I get to spend, one of the great things about my job, I get to spend my time around a lot of young interns and engineers who are very excited about science. There are a lot of people in this country who are. Everything goes in cycles, and I do believe that we will get back to that point where we believe in science and we're doing things for scientific reasons and commercial reasons. And let's not forget the romance and adventure of it. A lot of us were attracted to the romance and adventure, not just the science.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank our guests and thank all of you for coming and participating this evening. And enjoy the rest of your evening here at Griffith Observatory.